This is the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, the biggest, most fun podcast in the galaxy. We're Deanna, Brian, Cris, and Steve, and we love talking all things science fiction. This is Season 4, but our human adventure is just beginning as we gather around our computer consoles to discuss the science fiction of film, television, and literature. Join us on our quest for fun and fascination as we go where no podcast has gone before. Everyone has permission to come aboard the Big Sci-Fi Podcast, but make sure to find your seat fast because we're taking off in 3, 2, 1, hit it. This podcast is a part of the Trek Geeks Network.
Greetings, listeners of the Big Sci-Fi Podcast. Now, I've been wanting to do this episode with my co-hosts for a while. Say hi, everybody. Co-host.
Hi, everybody.
Howdy. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, what episode are we doing today? This is the Deanna Troi appreciation episode. So, yep, you've heard that right. We are dedicating an entire show to dissecting, discussing, and downright celebrating the emotional and ethical center of the Enterprise-D. I felt the time has come for us to acknowledge that amazingly complex Deanna Troi is a character deserving of her own time in the spotlight. When Star Trek Next Generation was in its initial run, I liked Deanna Troi, but I didn't think much more deeply about it. Over the years, as I've aged and rewatched the character in Picard and rewatched Next Generation, I've come to truly appreciate how amazing Deanna Troi, the character, truly is. So to kick off the appreciation, I want to point out that appreciating the character means it's as much an appreciation. My gosh, I'm going to trip over that word like 5 times now. It's as much an appreciation of the writers and the actress who brought this character to life as anything else. Okay, so we're going to get started with our first question for everybody. Is everyone ready?
Yep.
Cool.
Always ready.
Well, I want to know what everyone's favorite Deanna Troi moment was.
You want mine?
Sure, go for it.
First contact, drunk with Zephyrin Cochrane.
There's no time to argue about
I
time.
love it. I love it. It's so funny. It's so simple. The creator of Warp Drive, a man who's supposed to be the inspiration for everything that ever happened, is hitting on Deanna Troi, and he's drunk on tequila. I love it.
Barely hitting on her.
Oh, he's in there.
Yeah.
Barely?
But
It's what happened off screen. It's what happened when they didn't show it that she's talking about.
Fine.
Yeah.
But there was no time for that. And she knew it, even
Right.
if she was drunk.
I know,
Yeah.
but she was trying. I found him. Here he is. And he's blotto.
Mhm.
I love it.
So, Cris, what was your favorite moment?
I'd have to say, and there's so many to choose from. I got to say, you know what? I can't think
Own
of the name
self?
of the episode. Yeah, because I love it when she's able to complete the command test. I think that's strong because it shows a different element of the character that we haven't seen
Right.
before.
Right. My favorite, hands down, episode where Troi is doing some stuff is A Fistful of Datas. When they go into the holodeck and they're all dressed as it's a Western, and she is dressed the part and really gets into it. And I thought, for me at least, that was the first time in the series that she got to do something totally different and kind of have fun. And I really enjoyed that. And as a secondary answer, because I'm channeling my inner Adina, having more than one answer,
Nice.
is I loved her in oh my gosh, what's the name of the episode where Data has his daughter? Come on, help me out here. I can't believe I can't remember.
The Offspring.
The Offspring, yes.
The Offspring.
Before we get yelled at by people.
I thought that she was really good in that episode too. So mine is more episodic than moment.
Okay.
So there you go.
That's fair. And I think my answer is similar in that it's her episode Face of the Enemy.
Oh yes, great.
That was good.
And I think
Really
it was
good.
on a rewatch of that episode in the last year or two is what made me really want to talk about this, because that she wakes up
Yeah.
having been drugged and kidnapped and surgically altered, and she's expected to function, and she does.
Yeah, she
Yep.
nails
She
it.
functions the heck out of that, and I feel like that was when I've had my first kind of wake up call to, oh my gosh, this really is an amazing character.
That might be one of my kind of extra secret special favorite episodes. I just think that episode was so good and was so different for even that season too. Like it was a standout episode for me. So that's
Yeah.
a great choice, Adina.
I know. But doing what you mentioned about, taking the command test in thine own self, which I thought was, all these things, like this is I think one of the most well-developed characters in the show. We see her
Really?
do so well, because we see her do so many different things. We actually, I was thinking about this, out of any of the characters, I feel like we get more insight into her life even before the series, because we know her mother. So we know her
Right.
mother, we know details about her father, we eventually know about her sister. We get little snippets about her time at university on Betazoid in the Tin Man episode.
Right.
There's just, and then, and of course her relationships, she had this really big relationship with Riker, but then eventually she does, like there's so much that we get on her overall character that we just don't get with anyone else.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Because I was
Interesting.
thinking when I was doing my Dr. Crusher breakdowns, I was thinking, like, I thought of her as the one who's able to do a lot more that goes outside of her role as doctor, where she like is the captain. She becomes a detective at one point and a bunch of other stuff. But I think Troi is like that. And you're right, we don't get to know about anyone else's parents, really. We had the one scene with Picard's mom in who's like his imagination. But we really don't know much about his childhood until we get to Picard. Whereas, you're right. With Troi, we get all that stuff throughout the series.
Right. And partly because they kept bringing Lwaxana back, so that whole relationship develops.
One of the great reoccurring roles in Star Trek.
You couldn't ask for someone to have more fun than playing that role from what she had been before. I mean, really, she just had, like I get to cut loose and have fun. And it's great.
Yeah. So I think through that, we see, because they talk about her dad more. And again, right, the sister, and there was, and then of course in the first season, there was Haven. She was betrothed.
Oh, right. It's the Haven guy.
Yeah. So really, there's so, like, if you go through and look all the threads of her life, we get a little bit of parentage from others. We have the episode with Worf's parents. We see Picard's brother. We see a teeny tiny snippet of Picard's dad in Tapestry. We really don't get Beverly Crusher's background or family at all. We know actually very little about her background.
Just that weird episode with the ghosts.
And even then, other than she was kind of partly raised by her grandmother, there's really there's that's it. It's not much.
I wish they would have I wish we would have learned more even about Jack Crusher.
Yeah.
And even with like Worf's parents, I wish they were so delightful.
Yeah.
And I wish we would have gotten a little bit more with them. That was such great, tender-hearted, good fun, and we got it. You're right. I think the best example of exploring someone's family is with Troi and Lwaxana, her mother. I had never considered that before.
Yeah. And to see, like, even Troi, like, kind of take care of her mother, and not just in the Dark Page episode when she's having the dark stuff, but like Half a Life.
Yes. Oh, great episode.
Yeah, Half a Life. She was
just
really
all these things. And Mom comes and Troy's kind of like psychoanalyzing, like Mom, you're, doing this, you're doing that. Like,
I love how they had Troi, because Lwaxana, her mother, could be quite testing and demanding and not really caring about protocol and what's proper all the time, except for when she had to talk about her holder of the sacred chalice of Reese or whatever, but they really did a great job, I feel, of her working through that as a professional adult working through that and trying to love and honor her mother and respect her mother, but at the same time figuring out how to set boundaries. Such a hard thing to do as adult kids whose parents,
embarrass
still
you.
have opinions about your life and the decisions you make. But I felt like they portrayed that really well, actually. Huh. But of course, as a teenager watching it, I was, I didn't know any of that stuff.
Right.
But now looking back.
And that's kind of, that was, like I said, was kind of the genesis for this is I've seen these episodes 1,000 times, but it was in some recent rewatch that I was like, huh. Especially because I'm older, I think, than she was. I mean, actually further even along in my career than she was at the time of the show.
Right. Well, I love too about Troi, like in Face of the Enemy is a great example of her being able to dig her boot heels in and do what she's got to do to survive while trying to do the right thing too and figuring that out. Like, how do I have the best outcome possible here in these absolutely unbearable circumstances, nightmarish even. But really, Troi speaks her mind throughout the whole series. She's not afraid to say, this is what I think. This is what I think we should do. She's got that sensitive side, the caring side, the mothering side, the professional counselor side to her, of course. But Adina, this is making the character come to life.
Right?
They really did. Oh my gosh, she might be the most well-developed character in the next generation.
Right, exactly. I mean, she has a relationship with Worf's son. She's helping Worf's son.
Yeah.
She had a pregnancy and had a kid for a day on her own.
For a day. Yeah.
So much. There is so much.
I'm going to watch Next Gen all over again. Thank you.
It'd be very interesting to wonder when the creators of Next Generation, when they were laying out the ground rules of what the characters were going to be, did they consider it was going to go this far in her development? Or did they say, okay, so she is the first ship's counselor. She's empathic. She can read people's emotions. She can feel things. She's going to advise the captain on what these perceptions mean. Did they really think like it was going to just, or did they just say, let's just go on some interesting tangents of her character and develop her fully? But why didn't, as you're saying, she's the most well-developed one, not so much the other characters. Did they just like home in on her and say, this is the one we want to really develop?
Well, I guess, I'm sorry, Dina, you got me so passionate about this now. I guess probably if there was going to be other characters that could be in the running, we have to say Data.
Data for sure.
Of course, his whole trek to become, pun intended, to become human throughout the whole series, right?
Yeah.
And obviously Picard as well. I mean, just as far as screen time, I guess that's not necessarily the same as character development, though,
because he doesn't get a lot of I feel like he doesn't get if you look at Worf, he gets a lot of growth, a lot of backstory, whereas Picard is just a bit more comfortable with himself and with everyone else by the end. There's not a huge change from Picard season 1 to Picard.
He did a little more action
7.
as the series went on, but that's about it.
Yeah, he fell in love a couple times. The episode Family in season 4 was tremendous background work and just a beautiful, lovely episode all the way around.
That might be one of my favorite Picard episodes.
Yeah, me too. And favorite Next Gen episodes for me personally too. But you're right, Chris. Worf had tremendous development. I always loved his episodes where he got to learn about the Klingons and how they did that. But yeah, I mean, Geordi fell and had issues with being in love and had some background stuff. He had his own Romulan episode too. Remember where he had to work together with that other.
You're thinking.
Romulan
I was thinking of the
officer.
kidnapped one. The what's it called? Where he becomes a Romulan agent unknowingly.
That was
that was different.
Candidate.
Yeah, that was a different.
That
was the Mind's
episode.
Eye.
That's the one I was thinking of.
But the one where he gets stranded on a planet and he's him and
enemy
mine or
no,
something like that. Something the
I'm
enemy.
blanking on that. I think
I
that
think
says
it's
the enemy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is with the enemy though, it's not, I don't think it can be any, it's nowhere near the level of face of the enemy, because
Yeah, I agree
he's
100%.
stranded and he's doing
Mhm.
exactly what's expected in a situation like that. It's not, it's hard. It's a hard ship,
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
he doesn't have to pretend, he's doing exactly
Yeah.
what he should be
Mhm.
doing given the
Mhm.
circumstances. He
The
doesn't have to,
stakes are higher with Troi in her
in a
circumstance.
lot of
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing is, and so LaForge, and again, as much as I love Starfleet engineers, and I love every single, I love every single character, but he doesn't do a lot of different things. He's an engineer all the way through,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
right?
And he has the other situation, what's her name? Leah Brahms, which is like that's the other that's one of his, like, if you were to talk about Geordi, like what's his biggest problem? Probably that.
Mhm.
But you're right. He's an engineer. He doesn't get a lot outside of that.
Right. He does.
Adina, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Can I ask you a question?
Mhm.
And maybe for the whole team too.
Sure.
Is there a point in the series, whether originally or as we've rewatched it through the years, that where you first said, where you remember saying, I like Troi. I like that Troi. Is there an episode or a scene?
Hmm.
And as far as that goes?
I want to say, I think, so going back to, right, when I was a teenager watching the show for the first time, and I watched pretty much all of it in its first run. I want to say Troi probably, and this is not a pun, but it's going to come out like one. The character popped for me in the episode The Child, the first episode of season 2.
I don't think that deserves a bum ching. As a
Yeah.
pun,
But that was I don't know, that episode always for some reason stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because it's just the amazing thing of what she dealt with in like 2 days of time, like a day or two of time.
Yeah. It's hard because, like, with those characters, like I grew up with them. Like I think I was like 4 or 5, so I just felt like they were always there, second family. So I loved everybody, even though. And then it was later, and then when I got older, I was like, oh. Then I started to see the flaws in the characters, and that maybe, like, for example, like Troi wasn't always utilized in the most effective ways as she could have been.
Well, for me,
episodes.
Having grown up watching the original series first run, watching the movies, and then you have a new type of character added, whereas the emotional or the philosophical character, I guess, was Dr. McCoy on the original series, but he was always the grumpy guy. Here you have someone who is very, I know I'll use the term that I would have probably in 1987. She was very touchy-feely. And that was never something that you really saw in the original characters, that they were all touchy-feely. So it was hard to get into her character, but as it progressed and you could see how they were utilizing her character, it was very important because you need to have someone to express the emotional side. Whereas, it was always boldly going, and now they're feeling their way around.
Yeah, let's talk about our feelings.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that, and I want to now I'm motivated to kind of find some of this information. I wish I had thought about this before today to find it for today, but I want to see if there's any information on the creation of the character, because Roddenberry was very involved in the creation of the Next Generation characters, and so I'm wondering, like, and I feel like we've heard about casting Picard and what he wanted out of that character, and casting for like what he wanted out of the character of Worf, and Wesley. We've heard a lot of things about that. He was really loved the character Wesley. So now I'm curious, what did he think about, and who conceived of the character originally, and what did he think about that?
If he loved him so much, Wesley, why did he have the captain say, "Shut up, Wesley"?
Once. That was just once.
But that's enough.
That stuck. But like, the only thing I know about that I've heard about, like, the creation of Troi was, I believe it was the Generations commentary where the writers were talking, like Ronald D. Moore and Brandon Braga were talking about Troi, and they said a lot of it was because of the big therapy craze of the 80s. But I don't know beyond that. Like the weird thing is, it's like I can't think of another time where two actors are cast for a different part, but then they just flip, and it seemed like, because like I think like Tasha or not Tasha, what can I think of her name?
Denise Crosby.
Denise Crosby
The actress, yeah.
was originally supposed to play Troi, and then Marina Sirtis was supposed to
Ooh,
play Tasha,
wow.
and then
That
they
would be
like
very
realized,
different.
they should flip.
They,
So it's just weird that it's so interchangeable in that sense.
No,
Well, but it's not
they're
interchangeable,
very,
you know.
No, and yeah.
No, but I mean the
would
fact that they were
never
able to easily just say, "Oh, yeah, why don't you just switch the characters with each other?
Yeah.
Switch the actors."
Right. Well,
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I don't. But again, I don't think that it's easy. I feel like it's the eye of the people who are involved in casting, and they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, this doesn't make sense. Let's try something else that might make sense, and then so they got it right.
So
okay, fair.
So getting back to my original question,
What was your original? What was your original question?
was there
Are
an
you now?
episode? I've been combing through Paramount Plus's app,
Mhm.
looking at the episodes, and
Oh my goodness.
and I'm going. I remember when I was like, oh, that is different for Troi, and I was like, I like her a lot more now. And it took until the 4th season, which, by the way, if you haven't looked through all the 4th season episodes, really good stuff here. But episode number 5 from season 4, Disaster, where she
that was
has
season-
to
yes.
That was
over the
season 5,
bridge.
though, I think.
Oh, you're right, season 5.
Yeah, Disaster, I think, is like her big turning point.
For me, that's when I was like, okay, they're really doing something different with her character. And so that was for me. That was my answer to my own
Because I think
question.
that's so cool, because it's like then she's actually in command, and it's like she's learning that, hey, she doesn't actually have the skills she needs,
Mhm.
but she pulls it off. Like the way she's able to hold her ground with
Roe.
blanking on names. I want to
Yeah.
say the big salad. Ensign Rowe.
Big salad.
Row.
That's that's the Seinfeld thing where she's involved, and she buys George buys a big
Okay.
salad, and then Ensign Rowe takes credit for it.
Well, she had another great episode in season 5, Power Play.
Power
Mhm.
play is fantastic.
Yeah.
It is
I mean,
brutal.
loved her in that too. So for me, as I'm looking through all the episodes listed here, I think season 5, that's when we begin to see that turn towards her getting a taste of something more, wanting command, wanting more like that. It's brilliant. Those 2 episodes for me were.
But then there's all
Oh,
the
good.
Barkley episodes where it's just like her periodically. You get to see what her
Cast off your inhibitions.
Well,
but what her
But
not
it's-
day job isn't the right term.
But
Yeah.
there's
But, like-
a lot of but no, I think day job is the right term for that.
Right.
And there, we
Oh.
do see her do where she's not a major part, but she's there for
Yep.
the other character to play off, to play off of. And
Yep.
a lot of in a lot of those scenes, some of her lines are perfect.
My goodness,
Are you talking about like holodeck Troi? You mean like when she's actually like
No, no, no.
one-on-one therapy with Barkley?
with Barkley or other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the loss. And I feel like the
Oh,
loss
with
is the one
the-
episode I struggle with. But then I'm like realizing it's like, well, everyone can't always be at their best. So, okay, so they're also showing us her not at her best. She's basically, like has a limb cut off and is struggling as anyone should or would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good episode. I love going back to that one because you get to see, like, I feel like with the except, like, for maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like she's only ever mean in very extreme situations where I feel like everybody else has said something mean, where she's 99% the nicest person all the time and is clever. Like,
I agree with that. That's a great
brutal, except
thought.
when something sci-fi is happening, like she lost her powers or she's being turned into something evil by the mediator guy whose name I can't think of.
Make it
Oh,
stop.
that is, you
Make
know how
it
terrifying
stop.
that is? Like
Yeah.
that horrifies me. Not like, yes, of course he wiped out the entire planet and this whole species, but he
The
also just
Survivor.
like
No big deal.
Season 3
Put-
episode Survivor,
put a song
right?
like that thing stuck in
Or
her
was
head.
that for? Yeah, she,
What an
back,
episode.
again, back in the day as a young teenager, I'm trying to think of how old or young I was, but I remember going like that episode. I got it, but I was like, like, oh, I wasn't a Troi fan in that way. So it was just like, now that I'm analyzing this here, sitting in this chair behind the microphone, hearing you smart people talk about her, I'm like, holy cow.
But I never noticed that either, because what I find is interesting about Troi is that, like, day to day, I feel like she's not given a lot to do, but spread out, you see that she's given a lot. But like most episodes, it's like, oh, they're lying. Okay, well, we know that.
But that's exactly it. There's every now and then there's a little bit of that. There's
I feel
more. I feel like
there?
there's so much more to it than she gets a lot of other lines, but they're like might be one line here, one line there. So it's not a lot, but it's just enough.
Right. Okay, maybe.
And I think that's part of her day job as a counselor she really truly is there to counsel everybody, and she does.
Yeah.
By the way, Adina.
Yeah.
Did you make that Afghan sitting behind you there?
Yes.
It looks brown and tan and gray or something.
Yes, it's a crocheted thing. I crocheted this when I was pregnant with my little one.
Oh, okay.
It's not.
Sorry.
It's supposed to be a rectangle. It's not a rectangle.
Hey, so many crocheters before you have set out to make a perfectly
you're
symmetrical.
Supposed to count your stitches,
right? Yes.
And I was like, I don't need to count my stitches. I will do this by feel.
And now it's a parallelogram.
That's
it's
me with every piece of furniture I've had to put together from IKEA. I'll just feel this. I'll channel my inner Troi and just feel this thing out.
Segue. That's good.
So we've been podcasting for how long? And this has been here like the whole time,
Well, it just caught my eye right now. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine.
All right.
Anyway, that's the weird tangent. But you just learned something more about Adina's characters getting developed in this podcast today.
Yeah, sometimes I crochet.
Hey.
And there's actually, after this, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's at least 4 other crocheted blankets in my house. They're very comfy. What happens?
And they're made by you. That's special.
What happens is I go into the craft store and they have this really soft, really nice yarn on sale. So I have to buy it, and then I have to crochet with it.
It's like the fabric that Dr. Crusher wanted in Farpoint, where Troi was also like figuring out that there was something, there was a lot going on because of the pain, terrible pain.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cris, for bringing us back to planet Troi.
Planet Troi.
What do you think about Troi, Steve?
Again, as I said, when it started off, it was like, I don't understand why she's there. They never had these types of characters before, but she became much better. I think I like her a lot in the movies, her character in the films from First Contact, and then going into her being in Picard. And to me, I mean, one of the best moments that I've ever enjoyed, I have enjoyed, is that moment where Riker and Troi are in Vadic's prison.
Yeah.
And he said, I couldn't die without seeing your face one more time. I mean, that they could say about all the different things, but right there you could see these are two people who truly love each other and want to be together. And they were so open and very well. I just love that moment.
That's such a great reminder, Steve. And that was such a human moment too. That's what
two
people who are in that dire situation, they said what they needed to say to each other in that moment. I felt like it was written so beautifully, acted so beautifully between Marina Sirtis and Jonathan Frakes. It felt good and worked well because it was like, man, that's a discussion my wife and I might have in that situation if we were under those same circumstances. You kind of say what you have to work through it so you can get to the hugs, you can get to the I really do love you with my life, And
then of course Worf shows up and saves the day, and it's okay.
Which I'm really glad I'm so glad that Worf had the line where he was talking about thinking about her. I'm like, okay, I'm glad they finally acknowledged that those two dated for a while. But that's
just a teeny little while, and that's it, and then done.
But
I just wish they would have brought that up a little bit more. Let's acknowledge it.
I think it's one of the big mistakes of Next Generation's time is the Worf and Troi thing. I hated every second of it.
I actually love the two of them.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
I'm on an. I mean, I love Troi.
I know
That's
it's not
okay.
politically
Is,
correct.
is this
to
the
enjoy
concept
that,
of
but
opposites attract? Do you know that's what it's supposed to be?
I don't think it's passe.
I'm just kidding.
You
like
go
I know
ahead
it's
and
not.
like it, Chris.
I'm
It's okay, bro.
touchy-feely. No, I like to chop people's heads off.
There's
Okay,
gotta be a
that's
term.
good, you know?
For like not politically correct, but it's like directly. I don't know, something that's like
Directly.
Trek opinions.
Hold on,
you're not
like
supposed to
I'm
have.
getting
You know what I mean?
Webster's dictionary out to see if that's a true word, okay?
I like where you're going with that.
But can I say one thing? We need to set the record straight for movie Troi. That let's just acknowledge she didn't crash the Enterprise. She gets blamed for that all the time, but like by the time she took the helm, there was nothing she could do.
Yep, you're right.
So let's just
Absolutely.
acknowledge that once and for all, fans, she did not crash the ship.
Absolutely.
You heard it here on the BIG Sci-Fi Podcast. Christian Fox himself
Yes,
making this clear
Has
for all
cleared
of us.
her flying record.
I tried to, and I
And she can
can't.
get her Geico insurance
The one
again.
time she gets to drive the ship.
No,
She
the
has
one
to-
time we know. The one time we
She
know
has-
about.
Right. She had to try to make it land as smoothly. That's what her job was. She had to try to make it land as smoothly. All the damage, all the decisions had already been made, right, Chris? She was trying to just keep
I
it
think
from
so, but
flipping
I'm
head
trying-
over tail.
To figure out what she could have done because it was
Nothing.
Data who was like trying to level the descent. So
I
it's
think
like,
she was just kind of monitoring instruments and stuff like that. Because I
Yeah,
don't think
there
there was
was-
anything that could have been. No one could have done
And
anything
by
at that
the
point.
way,
yeah.
that
Let's
scene
by the
still
way,
looks good.
It
Mhm.
does.
That is all model work, folks.
Mhm.
model work.
That is
so
all
good.
100% model work. And it
Cool.
still looks good to this day.
Yep.
But
But
just
I
to
digress.
safety
I
just-
tangent a little.
for parents out there. Okay, here's a tip: if
Uh-oh.
you're in a ship and it's crashing, don't put people in the beds.
Right,
all
or
I got.
underneath glass. What was that about?
Yeah.
The glass was shattering everywhere on the Enterprise when
Yeah.
that thing went down. It sounded good, it looked good, and we went, "Oh no, glass!" But
Glass.
Steve's rubbing his head, folks. We
yeah,
need to get back to
'cause we get
Troy.
back to Troy.
Oh, no. Yeah. I'm enjoying this
Since we went
lovely
there
conversation.
in the Picard, I mean that was. I want to say, that there was that scene, yes, that Steve you mentioned, but I feel like the whole time that they were in, they being Troi and Riker, and seeing just what had happened to the characters over the
Yeah.
years, the fact that after they got married, they did have kids, and then they
Yes.
lost one of those kids.
Oh,
Mhm.
So,
imagine.
here you've got Troi that she's been through everything. She's lost a dad.
Yeah.
She
Mhm.
sort of lost a sister. I mean, like she did lose a sister, but she didn't know she did until she was older. It's quite very likely at that point she's lost her mother, and now she's even lost a kid.
And-
I mean, that's
Has someone written a novel about the death of Luoxana Troi and how that could have happened? And is that out there?
ask me that in a couple weeks. So we're gonna
Okay.
talk to some Trek authors, some novelization author. I'm not gonna say who yet, but we're gonna talk to
Sweet.
some novelization authors in a couple weeks.
Oh,
So I've been doing some homework. I've been reading some of their books and I have a bunch of questions for them about the different lines of development, because as some of the line, like the plot lines and the timelines in the novels, now that Picard is out, they don't match.
yeah.
Sure.
Well, so I got to finish reading the third book of that trilogy, where it's like the end trilogy, where they are like, "Hey, stuff is going down," and it's basically the end of the book universe, so that
Mhm.
the timeline matches up with the.
Well, yeah,
TV
I want to.
universe.
I want to So when we
So I
talk
need
to them, we're
to-
going to talk about this because I want to understand. Because what I'm reading now, things completely
Well,
don't.
so if you read like the
match.
last trilogy, that's like okay, where there's like, I don't know how spoiler you want to get, but there's stuff
Nope.
that goes on
not right
that's
now.
supposed to like, yeah,
Huh.
make it
Interesting.
fit, but it's
But-
also disappointing because as much as I love Picard and I love season 3, and I think they did a great job, I really like a lot of the storylines from the book universe
Sure.
that seemed a bit more true to what you would expect from
Well,
a continuation. Personally,
I agree with you. And Adina, my question to you is, have we answered any more than just your first initial question about Troy?
A little bit. I had some questions
We've
written
been
down.
knowing
about-
mixing in. We've
Okay.
been mixing in lots
Ask
of
more
these other
questions.
questions.
What's a good next question?
Oh gosh, I
Adina?
still have many. I still have many questions. Well, I guess let's talk about the whole counselor aspect, because we
Hmm.
talked about this when we last had our episode when the four of us were talking about Strange New Worlds, I know I went off on the whole idea that, wait a second, we're very aware of PTSD and all these things, and why don't they have, because in the 1980s, they knew enough to make this person not just be part of the ship, but be part of the bridge crew. Mm-hmm. So I feel like we've gone backwards in a not in a good way. And I'm wondering if, and Cris, you said this a few minutes ago about, there was a quote unquote, therapy craze in the 80s, but I feel like that craze never ended.
Well, yeah, it didn't end, but I think it started it was in the 80s.
So does having that character there is that reflecting a broader message about mental health and well-being? And if so, what the heck happened?
Well, because my issue is with Voyager, I get they wouldn't need one for a 3-week mission, but I just can't imagine that there's nobody on the ship like that. I thought you would think that somebody could step in. I mean, the fact that they have to have a volunteer nurse just to come in and put a couple of hours, who's also the helmsman, is problematic. So it just seemed like if any of the shows needed a counselor, well, actually, they all needed a counselor, and luckily they got one with Ezri in DS9.
Yeah,
even that wasn't handled that well, I don't think. And it just feels like, because you're right. You have a character who's on the bridge because clearly people at Starfleet are like, we know stuff's going to happen on the bridge of the Enterprise, and we want to have someone there that can help. Deal with that.
Here's food for thought, Cris. In Voyager, was Neelix the closest thing to a ship's counselor?
I think he was the closest thing, but I think it's like the old, just because you're a bartender, just because you talk to people for a living, it's very different from actually being the counselor.
Yep. 100%.
So it's
it's more of a therapist than a counselor.
Yeah, right, exactly. So it's just needed.
That's good, yeah.
So it just seems odd that they wouldn't continue that tradition, because clearly they realize that, hey, this is an important thing. I think, was it in the 80s, late 70s, they were learning about PTSD? Or that it was starting to become more.
I think it started to become more of a thing in the late 90s, or even later.
Well, they were recognizing it with Vietnam vets coming home from the war, and how they reacted to their reception by the media and the public, and how, different from the vets coming home from World War II who just clammed up and just didn't talk about it, and until Grandpa said, "Oh yeah, I was there at the Battle of the Bulge," But I think that's what came out of it, is that we started to recognize that people coming out have PTSD. Maybe it wasn't that exact words were used for the Vietnam vets, but something of that nature was coming out, that you could see that they were affected by it, because we were more emotional, we were more open, as in the 60s and the 70s and so on. So I could see it developing and adding that character into Star Trek because it would be needed. So
Well, do we think too, like I don't want to personally, I'm just speaking for myself.
Of course.
I think sometimes we can overthink what writers originally were planning for, because I think a show that runs as long as 7 seasons, there's some changing and adapting. Of course, you bring in one aspect of a character's history or whatever, and then you go, oh, wait a minute, that will open the door for this and this and that and the other thing. And so I'm wondering if, even if it was a by chance happy, positive thing that they came upon with Troi, it is interesting they didn't have necessarily that type of character in Deep Space Nine right away, but it was also you have to consider it was a different part of the Trek universe. It was largely an alien universe as opposed to a human universe, as Next Gen was, as far as who we were focused on, so
I can excuse it in Deep Space Nine for that reason. I can excuse it on Voyager because maybe the person who's supposed to be the counselor got killed in the initial thing. But coming now into Discovery and Strange New Worlds, even though those take place before, I feel like, given our real world knowledge, and they should absolutely have counselors, and with some easily explained excuse why we never saw that on TOS. Like there was probably one there. We just never saw them because there was 400 and something people on the ship and we didn't see them all.
Mhm.
You know, so, and I guess that's what's disappointing to me because clearly they both need that. And the only other one that I think has a counselor that we've seen is Lower Decks. And in that, they make fun of the dude in a way.
Do they really?
Well, I mean, they use him, but he has a penchant for making metaphors with salad and food, like with food, everything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. It's cute. And I'm glad they have it. But like, again, shouldn't this be some, Discovery needs a counselor.
Right.
Strange New Worlds needs a counselor.
And again, like what Steve, you said, that there's a difference between a real trained counselor and a therapist. And I would add, for my profession, a pastor too, I do a lot of marriage counseling, but I actually say to people when they walk in my office, hey, I'm not a trained counselor. I have a certain set of skills that might help you. At some point, it may be that I'm going to actually suggest that you go to a professional. I will help you as far down the way as I can and be as positive to the situation as I can. But at some point, I'm going to tell you, hey, this has reached the end of my expertise and my knowledge and experience. And so as we're talking and as I'm thinking about Troi, like, I'm really glad now, maybe even proud as a Trek fan, like Deanna is, that they really did a great job with Troi's character, and she was influential on the ship. She wasn't just someone some people went to boo-hoo to and have this moment where they can say, I'm upset at Captain Picard and you can't tell him anything, It was, she actually helped people in their own character development, in their own lives, in their own careers. And in the end, what we get is this really strong woman character that had intense purpose and incredible abilities and talent beyond even just her own counseling career and expertise. Like, she had a lot to offer. She was well-rounded in that way. And so that's, I mean, I'm telling you guys, this is the sound of my mind blowing. I've never thought of Deanna Troi this deeply before.
And she's also great in Voyager when she shows up. And she's influential to Voyager, like to Barclay getting the communications array working.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that.
It's a good little, not trilogy. I think it's a couple of episodes, but it's a good side story. I was going to say, I had some thought. I can't think of it.
Yeah. Well, I almost want to Brian, what you just said a second ago was like, that was so perfect. I almost want to end it. Can we end on? Can we end on that?
Are we done,
Troi?
We might be, because that was just so good.
Okay.
Yeah. Well then, do you guys have any last thoughts that you want to share about the amazing Deanna Troi?
I do.
Yes.
Real briefly. I vote right now. I say we take a vote as the Big Sci-Fi Podcast crew that we never bring up the romance between Worf and Troi ever again on this podcast.
I can do that.
I'm okay with that.
I will
3 out of 4.
I will 4 it out of duress. Duress? What's the?
That's the word, duress.
Yep.
I would rather talk about Worf being a terrible father, Chris.
Oh, there we go.
I
was not going to bring that up.
I kept my Worf's stupid relation. What a
I just want to say,
even
though Brian called it out in DS9, and so did Martok. So. Because he even said, like, well, what do you care? You never see your son.
Right. You're right.
So,
okay.
It's like, what?
Before we go, on Deanna. On Adina's list of questions or discussion points, she talks about Deanna Troi spinoff series.
Oh, I did write that down as an idea.
So let me just say, how about Star Trek Legacy? And she shows up on that.
Yeah,
I'd like to see her again.
Still alive. She's right there.
Yep.
You can have all the girls together.
They
driving
imply,
the Enterprise.
Yeah, and they imply that she's still actively counseling, because she's having that conversation with Data, and so there is the implication that she's actively doing her thing. Yes, she could absolutely be part of Star Trek Legacy.
So
I love
there
it.
could be a spin-off. And I think it would work because, or at least a cameo or occasional appearance.
Mhm.
I mean, again, remember, it would be a 10 episode season,
Boo.
but I know we feel about all of them that way. But
We
again,
need 24.
Yep.
she could appear in that. So
That's true.
fingers crossed. Maybe.
That's
I
true.
don't know.
Yeah,
That's
I'd
true.
love more
Okay.
Troi.
That's
I'll leave
true.
it with that. I'll leave it at that.
Cris, do you have any final thoughts?
She was great when she was telling Riker off when he was getting all revengey, trying to find Captain Picard when he thought he had died.
Mhm.
That's a great scene.
That is.
And also, just one last quote, even though it's related to a Troi quote. It's the drunk thing. It's like, "Who are you, boyfriend? No, good." Sorry, it's husband.
I love it. That's why I love that sequence. It's so good. It really
Cool.
is.
Well, and I think everyone obviously knows my feelings about Troi, given I'm the one who brought this episode to the table. I
Mhm.
love the character. I'm gonna just keep watching it, rewatching it, and getting more tidbits out of it every time. So, guys, as we bring our spaceship back into orbit, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who joined us on this appreciative deep dive into the one and only Deanna Troi. We hope this episode has given you a renewed sense of appreciation, like it did for Brian, for our favorite half-Betazoid counselor from the Enterprise-D. And hey, if you find yourself pondering the galaxy's mysteries or facing a tricky moral dilemma, just ask yourself, what would Deanna do? And feel free to share your thoughts by emailing us at the Big Sci-Fi Podcast at Gmail or connecting with us on our social channels. Remember, we're a proud part of the Trek Geeks podcast network, so make sure to explore trekgeeks.com for more Trek-tacular content.
Ooh.
Until our empathic senses tingle again, keep spreading love and understanding throughout the universe. Live long and prosper, and don't miss our next episode for another thrilling journey through the stars with the Big Sci-Fi Podcast.